I've always said the Ramaphosa presidency for me has been a very, very problematic thing. You cannot protect a system that is failing the people that need to be your customers. I'm done with unity politics. I'm done with unity politics. I am about solidarity politics. MK has postured, for better or worse, as a progressive party.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to the Jacob Zuma, George Soros podcast. I'm just kidding, man. Social media is a crazy place. Welcome back to SMWX. It's good to be with you. And today I'm extremely excited to be joined by none other than Tessa Dooms. Tessa, it's great to have you back.
Thank you for having me back. That intro was wild, by the way.
South Africans are confused. It's a confusing time in South African politics. No one knows where things are going. Discuss what's top of mind for you right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's a very confusing time, but a confusing time also to the extent that it's a dangerous time, right? And I say it's dangerous because I think that there are a lot of echo chambers in South Africa at the moment.
Sure.
So a lot of people are talking in bubbles and they think that their bubble is the whole universe, right? Which means we're not listening to each other.
Yeah.
I've been in so many rooms after the election where one of two things have happened. I could either predict the conversation without any intervention. Like, I know this group of people and I can predict with clarity what people are going to say.
Yeah.
Or I'm in a room that doesn't feel like South Africa at all. And, you know, there's just no conversation that is happening, no substantive conversation. It feels like we're in a bubble. And I've said to people, post the 2024 elections, it feels like we are in a malaise. Everybody's kind of just very hazy, very unsure, but also pacifying ourselves with some or other narrative that everything is fine, right? So if you are a GNUer, you're like, everything is fine, the GNU is working, the sky didn't fall during the elections, everything is fine. If you are an MKer, you're like, oh my God, the MK to the rescue, everything is fine. We're going to defeat capital or whatever. If you're an EFF person, or you're like, we're going to rebuild, everybody's kind of nursing themselves with narratives that everything is fine while everything is not fine. Right? None of our indicators that were bad before the election have changed for people in terms of their real lives. Like, none of the things that really show us the state of South Africa. So I was sitting down and talking to somebody who's visiting from the US. And yes, not everybody who visits from the US is here on a mission to tell us what to do. Just say. But a student from the US and just trying to explain, post-apartheid South Africa. She was here to learn about the TRC. And I was able to just drop some statistics that are valid today about the fact that half of people that start grade 1 don't manage to enter grade 12. Never mind finish grade 12. About the fact that we have actually 40% unemployment, even though the number went down from 32 to what, that is the what do they call it? The narrow definition of unemployment. The expanded definition that includes discouraged work seekers is still at 40%. We still have 6 million people living in shack dwellings, and that doesn't include homeless people. Those real indicators, food prices are still high, 20 million people still wake up in hunger every day in South Africa as we speak. And so, yes, the political sky may not have fallen, and we are grateful that we got through what was actually a change election. This was a change election. We got through a change election where the numbers looked completely different from what they've ever looked before, without violence and without what Mozambique is going through right now, where there's an internet shutdown and there are millions of people on the street every day. And so, yes, we must be grateful for those things. But we must not become the USA or Brazil or any of the European countries that go into everything is fine mode as long as the worst doesn't happen. Because what happens is a slow decay. And that's what we've been experiencing for years now. I've always said the Ramaphosa presidency for me has been a very, very problematic thing. Because what it's done is we've become the frog in the boiling pot. Because there's not a catastrophe the whole time. But this ever-increasing decay of the state of our lives, the state of the future. And it starts to show, and it's eroding away at us slowly. And we are not coming together and actually discussing the problem. In fact, we are discussing each other. We are discussing personalities. We are discussing parties, but we're not actually discussing the state of the country anymore. And that's dangerous.
I want to get into so much of that because I think you've set the table for a series of interesting discussions. And this thing about echo chambers is so true. And I feel I was thinking literally the exact same thing the other day. And I was like, the walls of the echo chambers are getting thicker and thicker. And the noise inside those chambers is getting louder and louder. And yet there is just no conversation between those echo chambers. And you're one of the few people who often will break through these different echo chambers, and then all hell breaks loose because people don't know what to do. I
know what you're referring to, Sizwe.
Are you on social media by any chance?
Let's actually address it.
Okay, let's address that because, maybe, and this is the good thing about this platform is at least, unlike Twitter where things are always compartmentalized and you can expand and you can talk and be a real person rather than an image in people's minds, So I'm curious about that MK tweet. You tweeted MK is the future of progressive politics. And a lot of people reacted to it, shall we say. What were you actually thinking then? What's the thing you're trying to bring to the public attention about MK?
Yeah, so having looked at what's happened, not even just since the election, but this entire election and then the post-election period, it became very clear that MK was going to be the most important factor in this election from about January. I think it occurred to me in about February when I went down to KZN.
Yeah, we were chatting at that time.
Yeah.
But so few people even saw that at that time.
Absolutely. When I got to KZN and I realized the street vendors were selling MK merch. And I was like, there's something going on here. This is not a small thing that is happening.
Yeah.
Right? And then fast forward to when we were at The Rock. And you and I made a very interesting discovery at The Rock. We discovered that there were small parties at The Rock that didn't even get 1,000 votes, that were extraordinarily excited about the result. And we were like, what is going on here? And somebody was like, no, Ubaba's winning.
That's so
and
true.
We started realizing there were small parties that were definitely invested in MK more than in themselves.
Oh my God, I completely forgot about that story. Do you remember
Yes.
we were walking in The Rock and then someone from a small party came up to me and it was like, we
Excited.
won. And I was like, what party are you from? They're like, no, not us, MK. I was
Yes. Yeah. And it was one of those small parties. Nobody knew their name, all of that. And then it hit me that MK had been mobilizing beyond themselves. So when everybody was thinking about has MK infiltrated the EFF or the ANC, it had become clear to me that MK was everywhere, right? And so we then started to understand the scale of MK was much larger than it looked. And so you can't ignore that. You can't ignore MK in that kind of reality. And then a day later, there were 26 parties standing behind Jacob Zuma. When we were at The Rock and he was making those pronouncements around the IEC. So from that point onwards, I've taken MK extraordinarily seriously. Because I'm like, when you see something, I'm a political commentator. I comment on what I see, not on what I want. I see things that I go, hey, guys, have you looked at that? And think about its implications.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's been two things that we've done wrong, that majority of people in politics have done wrong and outside of politics, because again, Rivonia Circle, we were listening to voters before the election happened, right? So we did what we called voter-to-voter conversations.
Right.
And that meant we didn't allow politicians in the room. We let voters talk amongst each other as they were making voting choices. And so again, I heard people reason around MK, and I realized it wasn't about Jacob Zuma. And so one of the mistakes we've made in analyzing the prospects of MK is making it about Jacob Zuma, the person.
So true. So true.
And attaching everything about MK and who's joining and who's not and measuring it against Jacob Zuma. And I'm going to make this comparison a few times, but I'm making it for illustrative purposes. I do not want to get into a debate about me conflating these two people as one, right? But I think there is a parallel to be drawn here. It's in the same way that in the US, people are making MAGA, the movement, about Donald Trump, the person. And you're conflating things.
Yeah.
You're conflating what people are buying into at a ideological level, at a sociological level, at a political level, into a person. Yeah. And I think that there are people who support MAGA who are all about Donald Trump, and there are people who support MAGA who have nothing, no interest, despite Donald Trump. Yeah. Or don't even support MAGA, but will vote for MAGA, will buy into it because they don't support the establishment.
Absolutely.
The establishment that is the US political elites and economic elites. And Donald Trump, like a Bolsonaro, like a Le Pen, like many other people, have not come up to sell something. They've just come up on a wave that says there's something wrong with the establishment. And I am willing, courageous enough, whatever, to point it out. So some people are just on that bandwagon. And I heard a lot of that when voters spoke about MK.
Yeah.
Where voters were saying, no, we're going to vote MK just to teach the ANC a lesson. We're going to vote MK just to teach white people a lesson. There's so many things going on in terms of why people are attaching themselves to MK that has nothing to do with the person of Jacob Zuma.
Yeah.
And I think that's a political reality that may be uncomfortable. It may be wrong. They may be wrong for doing that because the power that Jacob Zuma has in that party is undeniable. You can see it in their constitution. But that's still what people's realities are. And I think that goes to the second point that we've made, is this idea that MK is just going to disappear. It's going to implode. Then if I hear another person tell me that MK is the new Cope, I'm going to just lose my mind.
I know it's copium, because it's a way that people are trying to nurse their fear of MK coming onto the scene. I fully agree with you. So there's the Zuma trope. It's all about Zuma. There's the MK is on the verge of imploding trope. There's the ethnic mobilization trope. And I think those are the three dominant tropes around MK, all of which obviously play some part in MK. But to collapse and, as you say, conflate MK to those things is to make a drastic mistake, because there's so much else going on. In fact, there was a friend of mine who was in KZN just in the build-up to the election and spending a lot of time in rural KZN. And he was saying, there's something so interesting about the idiom that MK is using. Firstly, using the Zulu language, not because it's Zulu nationalism, but to say that politics doesn't have to happen in the English language all the time. Reflecting on certain cultural and traditional values that resonate with people, whether you like them or not, and bringing that into the formal political space. And doing so in a way where people are like, we've been locked out for so long and our identity in this space has been denied for so long. It's finally being affirmed. There's so much going on that people are failing to see. And it's like, this is one of the biggest political changes in our country.
We can't ignore it.
We're locking ourselves into these tired tropes.
Yeah, and you can't ignore it. That doesn't mean you by saying, like, there's nothing I can do to legitimize MK.
Yeah, exactly.
More than MK can legitimize MK.
Yeah, 2.5 million votes.
Really, like, I cannot legitimize MK more than what it has managed to do for itself, right? It got double the amount of votes almost that COPE got when COPE was a disruptive force in our politics with half the amount of time almost, right? So you can't ignore that. And I think that people would like to ignore MK. I think, and particularly people in civil society, I think people in progressive spaces would like to ignore MK because it makes the world feel safer, because MK introduces a level of uncertainty into our politics and a level of disruption into our politics that we say we want. But it hasn't come in the form that people would like, that makes people comfortable. Even me. But I've decided to confront that reality, not run from it. Yeah. That's the first thing I was communicating in that thing, is that I take seriously that MK is here, and unless I get other information, it looks like it is galloping ahead.
Yeah.
It is organizing itself and galloping ahead. Now, you may say it's anti-democratic organizing in the way that it is establishing itself. Yes, you're correct. Yet it is still doing that, and it is still gaining traction. You may say it is conservative values that they're driving in their manifesto. Yes, but that somehow resonated with 2 million voters. When the election before, when Irvin Jim's party presented itself as a socialist, progressive, union-based party with 300,000 members, it got 5,000 votes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you cannot tell me that I must overlook the 2 million people that voted there because those are just conservatives, especially when those conservatives have been largely drawn from one of the most progressive forces in South African history, the ANC.
Yeah, yeah.
So they are mobilizing ANC voters and EFF voters. We all agree on that.
And the radical side of the ANC, not like the moderate base of...
I even disagree with that. I disagree with that because I don't think that it's just about radical politics either. I think it's also about a politics of opportunity. One of the things that we've been clear about is that South Africans have been looking for, South African voters have been looking for an alternative to the ANC for years now.
Absolutely.
And not just a new party. Otherwise, all the 500 parties that exist would satisfy somebody's thirst. People have been looking for an alternative to the ANC. So even if Floyd reckons that here's an opportunity to shape this thing to his own beat.
Sure.
So I think people see in MK an opportunity. Maybe it's because they think Jacob is going to, collapse and die. And they can then become the incumbent on this machinery that is built.
Sure.
I heard something silly today on the way here. Somebody was saying MK is the brokest party in South. Cause that just is like, there's no way, right? Because there's also a machinery there that clearly has resources. And even if we don't want to talk about resources before the election, they get 3.5 million rand per seat in parliament.
Absolutely. I was just going to say on the basis of just the electoral system.
And that's besides the salaries people got.
Think of KZN, local, the provincial government.
They got 3.5 million rand for every seat in parliament just to the party.
More than the EFF has ever had from the electoral system.
Absolutely.
On the first go.
So there's a lot of political opportunity people that see there. And the other thing about it, and I've said this so much to emerging parties, I've said, if you look at the parties that have grown since they started, all of them have allowed contestation publicly. Now, people might say the MK is different because the MK has already pronounced they're not going to go to conference. Yet we have watched the MK fight each other in public every week without fail. Because one of the things that makes political parties work is when there is contestation and people can contest each other, win or lose, and still stick to the thing. That's how the ANC's managed to, quote unquote, revive itself. Not renew. It's definitely not renewed, but it's revived itself with every contestation, right? And I would argue that there are parties like the UDM that are never going to grow because there's no contestation. There's no space for debate. There's no space for challenging. And granted, there's very little space for ideological debate in parties anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But this is now contestation for power and positions. So we've now reached the floor. But even at the base level where you're talking about power and positions, there's a level of contestation. And people can fight. And for me, political parties need to be like siblings. People need to operate like a family, like siblings. Your siblings are the people that you can fight with hard because you know they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, when you're a political party and you can't fight because people will just go, you can't build anything. You can't build a comradeship out of that. Now, again, this is not talking about the quality of their politics. I'm not questioning whether or not they are progressive or not, or whether I agree with their values or not. I'm looking at politically what's going on. So I say all of that, and I say that makes MK very much a prospect of a party that's going to continue to grow, whether we like it or not. Now you say, okay, what is it growing to do? And that's the thing that my tweet was answering. MK has postured, for better or worse, as a progressive party.
Yeah.
And that idea has been legitimized, particularly by the EFF, unfortunately. So once the EFF invites the MK to a progressive caucus in parliament, You are calling the MK progressive. Now you're fighting me because I said because I used the word progressive that you used when you partnered with the MK party. The MK has been saying it is progressive politics the whole time. People have, I've seen maybe a think piece or two saying the MK is not progressive, but that narrative is not caught on in society.
No, yeah.
That narrative is not, it's not part of the discourse. In fact, what MK has successfully done is it has turned the conversation about progressive politics into two things. One, pro-black politics. They have turned the word progressive in a short space of time to acutely focus on pro-black, pro-poor. And they claim to be both of those things, right? So they've ignored all the other parts of being progressive.
Yeah.
And they've just zeroed in on that. And the other thing is progressive is anti-establishment. But in this case, the establishment is neoliberal. Now, all of the people who believe that they are progressive in South Africa agree on an anti-capitalist agenda and
theory.
agree to push back against neoliberalism.
Yeah.
That's what the whole, the thrust of it is. Yes, we also agree in human rights. We agree on social justice. We agree on the values, especially the socioeconomic rights in the Constitution. But here's a mistake that we've all made, and I've had to grapple with this in the last few weeks. We have become very passive about assuming that we live in a largely progressive left society. And the Constitution has become our dummy reason for it. We have a progressive Constitution, therefore we are a progressive country. And our politics, leave MK aside, our politics is largely showing us that South Africans are highly conservative in their daily lives. There was a survey that came out today that said 7 out of 10 men in South Africa think that a woman's place is in the kitchen. That think a woman must be subordinate to a man. That's the country in which an MK can call itself progressive and win that debate or win that argument politically. Now, they may be wrong at a textbook level. They may be wrong substantively. But politically, they are winning a narrative battle in a largely actually conservative society. Even economically, the EFF is interesting in this regard. The EFF is anti-capitalist, definitely. But the EFF slogan is always around jobs. Where are those jobs meant to come from? They want capital to hire people so people can have jobs. Why would the EFF say that? And is that not a compromise in certain ways? The reason why it's not a compromise is because the EFF knows that people generally in this country who are jobless and on the margins of the economy want into capitalism. And not because capitalism is great for them, but because it's the only thing we know. For 30 years, we have been socializing the society into capitalism being part of the democratic project.
So we are going to get in so much trouble for this podcast, but it's going to get viewed a lot of times, and that's one thing that I've started to also realize is when you look at the reach versus the noise, I always focus on the reach because that means that there are people watching, listening intelligently, even if they don't necessarily have something to react to. And so much of what you've said seems common sense to me, but just a few thoughts as we explore the conversation. Then we must move away from MK.
We're not even talking about MK
if it's possible.
We're talking about the South African society.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what people want to hear. This is the topical, are we not supposed to talk about what's topical? Anyway, so the thing for me with MK is that I don't know what work this word progressive is doing when we paint in broad brushstrokes anyway, right? Because the fact of the matter is that some of the things MK proposes actually are progressive, in my view, right? Some of the things they have proposed are not. Now, I don't get what work saying this is all progressive or this is all regressive does. A more nuanced analysis is this is dangerous, this is regressive, but this resonates and it is progressive and has always been progressive. And same for the ANC.
That's been a critique from left activists of the ANC for a long time.
And the EFF, indeed.
And the EFF.
But it doesn't make sense.
Actually, less so the EFF.
Well, some people have really called the EFF fascist and right and all of that for a long time. So,
fair.
Yeah.
I think there are other reasons why left activists don't like the EFF.
Sure.
But I think that we have lost the need to have conversations about ideology. And that's been the problem. So because we have a progressive constitution, nobody needs to have a conversation about what progressive means. It just means what it means. You are pro the constitution because the constitution is progressive. And so we want to have simple conversations about complex things.
Absolutely.
Without talking about the fact that ideology itself is not fixed, right?
Indeed. And you can be progressive in one way and retrogressive in another way. And we need to see both of those and how they're responding. So to me, firstly, also, the other thing is that MK is still in the making. So we don't know what MK is going to finally settle on. But MK seems to be espousing what would traditionally be called a socially conservative message.
Absolutely.
Right now, right?
And that's a really important point.
Yeah, socially conservative.
Because I do think that if you split the two up, right, that MK is definitely socially conservative in a number of different ways.
For now, I think there's some pushback, but from what we've heard so far, it's socially conservative.
And that where in the places in which it is most progressive, and I say most progressive because I don't even think that economically it is entirely progressive.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because I don't think that the MK is going to abolish the capitalist system tomorrow.
Sure. Absolutely.
I actually don't think, I think if Jacob wanted to do that, he would have done it. Right? But I think that it's saying that the people who are there now are not the people who are in our interest. And therefore we're going to push back against. And that's why I think it is more anti-establishment politics than it is left politics or right politics or progressive politics or conservative. The only thing I know for sure that it is anti-establishment politics.
Sure.
That I can say with confidence. So if you ask me, what is MK? I would say it's anti-establishment politics. Now, the problem with that is you then have to ask yourself, are you with the establishment or not? Because that becomes a much more complex conversation because the establishment can be both capitalism and the constitution.
But it's so interesting because it's also ambiguous because their leadership comes from an establishment.
The leadership was the establishment.
The ultimate establishment, but it's also anti-establishment.
But the reason why they get to do it is because Jacob Zuma gets to say the establishment kicked me out.
Yeah,
it rejected me.
Sure.
So now I'm anti the establishment because the establishment kicked me out. But here's, and this is the last thing I'll say on that tweet and then we can move. What I was saying really is that for as long as MK continues in the way that it is, owning the narrative, and especially the narrative about progressiveness and organizing the way it is, it will establish itself as the definer of what it means to be progressive. It will define progressive because it is calling itself progressive in a way that is not being delegitimized. And whatever it says is progressive is ultimately what will become the norm of what it means to be progressive if it continues in the way it is. And the difference between the MK and the people shouting at me on Twitter, sorry guys, is that the MK is organizing and the people on Twitter are not organizing. And that's the biggest thing for me about the politics of the next 5 years that I think we should be talking about is organizing in South Africa.
Fam, I just wanted to interrupt this episode to let you know the 4 ways you can help SMWX. Way number 1, you can invite me to speak at your institution or company. Way number 2, you can advertise on this channel. Way number 3, you can become a member of this channel. The link to the membership is down below. And number 4, you can buy merch that's books or hoodies. Now let's get back to the episode. All our contact details are in the description box below. What I think is actually one of the reasons why the MK message resonates is because they've got this theme that's running, which is like, no more nice. Like, we've tried that approach. This time, we're gonna be ambitious. We're gonna do things differently immediately. Now, what those things are, we can debate, right? But I think there's a yearning in South African society for something different, right? Now, the only answer to that on the GNU side, which we'll now move on to in a bit, is, well, we'll change everything while keeping everything the same. Like, what policies have fundamentally shifted since this new GNU? Nothing, right? So MK is resonating to some extent because I think people believe that despite whatever happened in the past, this time they're serious about doing something different. It could be right, it could be wrong. But the political response to that can't be, well, let's just make sure everything is stable and just keep stability, because that is going to ultimately be a losing political message, because people need something to change, and they need it to change immediately.
And this is not a South African issue. This is a global issue. And I've spoken about this a million times, and I don't think people have heard me, to be fair. And I'm going to say this boldly now, because the only difference between me and Gayton is Gayton has the courage to say shit about himself. I don't.
Hey, the gloves are off today, hey?
I'm now going to start getting bold about saying
I'm here for it.
That I said this. I have said, I even did a TED Talk. Go and watch the TED Talk, comments. I even did a TED Talk when I said that democracy around the world, as in its institutional forms, is broken. It needs to be upgraded, not fixed. That if you're just going to patch it up and fix it, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
I said 2 years ago at a Defend Our Democracy conference that I'm not a defender of democracy. And I don't believe we must defend democracy, because when we say that, we are saying we are defending the status quo.
That's how
and
people
we're trying to fix a system that is not working for the majority of people.
Yeah.
And we agree it's not working for the majority of people, especially as social justice activists. We have watched it not work for the majority of people. Yet our language is we must defend democracy at all costs.
People just here defend the status quo.
Exactly. And I'm saying, as somebody who loves democracy, as somebody who believes in the governance of people by themselves for their own ends, that what we must do is confront the problems with the systems of democracy we have put in place today and innovate democracy so that it still maintains its principle about self-governance of the people, but it now finds new forms and new expressions. And the danger of not doing that is that people who don't give a damn about democracy will be the only ones saying we are willing to change the status quo.
Absolutely.
And they will get the support, even if they're doing it for bad interests, for their own ends, because they will screw people over, because they themselves are part of the elites. Trump is a working class hero.
Yeah.
He's an elitist man who's a rapist, convicted so, who is a working class hero for not, I was going to say for white women, but actually this election showed that except black women in America, everyone else voted more than 50% population for Trump. So, and the majority of those people are people who are just working people. They're not part of elite circles and structures in society. Now, Trump becomes a working class hero in a country that has a Bernie Sanders, because the Democratic Party that Bernie Sanders is a part of refuses to point out the weaknesses in the systems that are currently the norms of democratic governance, and the ways in which democracy that is meant to be for everyone has become an elite sport. Now Trump, an elite, gets to point that out and benefit from it for no good reason but his own. That's the danger of people who believe in democracy being too scared to call out when the system fails, and not brave enough to say we can innovate this thing and make democracy better rather than trample on democracy. That's what I think the next 5 years is about. It's about a fight for, firstly, a re-looking at democracy, re-looking at its institutions, saying nothing is sacrosanct until the people, everyone benefits. There's a politician in this country. I don't even know if I can name him now, because I'm going to actually name him. So Magashula Ghana says in Parliament, the politicians have eaten, it's time for the people to eat. It's time for the people to eat, guys.
Absolutely.
It is time for all of us to benefit from democracy. It is time for the young man in Mlazi that I always talk about, who said, we don't vote because we just get a vote and somebody else gets the democracy. To get some democracy. And that should not mean that he has to trade off his rights, that he has to trade off a better society, that he has to trade off all of those things. Afrobarometer survey from 2021 about South Africans, 72% of South Africans say that they would give up the right to vote if they got better development outcomes. Keeps me awake at night. Absolutely. It keeps me awake at night. And we will continue to have democracies that will start to roll out autocrat after autocrat through elections. Because we are failing to confront where the system is broken. And this applies to everyone. It applies to parties, it applies to civil society, and it applies to business. You cannot protect a system that is failing the people that need to be your customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't keep onto a system that might benefit some, but the majority are saying, nah, this is not where it is. Because ultimately, you can't have a thriving business if the country doesn't exist. People don't have toilets, but you want to build more BMWs. Are you crazy? The people who build the BMWs don't have toilets. But you think that we're just going to continue to have a thriving economy on the top end while everything goes to hell at the bottom. We have to all come together. And I say this as a person who speaks to everyone. And that was part of your point earlier. I'm willing to sit, guys, I've been in rooms with enough Afrikaner people in this country that I can explain Afrikaner politics up and down. I speak to PA people all the time. I can explain PA politics up and down. I think I might have gotten them some votes, in fact, because I can explain them so well. But I speak to people I disagree with all the time in South Africa. Because number one, I think we need to understand each other better and hear each other better, because no one's going anywhere.
Yeah.
By the way, no one's going anywhere. But the second thing is, I'm done with unity politics. I'm done with unity politics. I'm about solidarity politics. I'm about us building solidarity, not unity.
Yeah, unity is just a scam all around.
Unity does not get us anywhere. Unity gets us, in the same room tolerating each other.
Not actually talking about what we need to talk about.
Absolutely. And last year I was invited into a room of about 80 Afrikaner activists. Activists. I found out when I got there, I was the keynote speaker. So I keynoted. And I remember saying that, because I listened to the conversation before I got up, and everybody was talking about how, as the Afrikaner people and as Afrikaans activists and as people who, want what's best for South Africa, the race question needs to be reopened. And we need to, fix South Africa and mend it. And we must get back to the 90s level of reconciliation. And I was like, you see, this is what you think we want to hear. But nobody cares about race unless we also care about resources. Just treating people nice that look different from you is very different from the dignity of shared resources. And that's a much more difficult conversation to have. Yeah. And so no one cares about reconciliation without resources. If the resources can't be redistributed and reconciled, then there's nothing really that people want to talk about.
Let's reconcile wealth.
Yes, let's reconcile wealth.
The people will come after that.
Exactly. But I'm not going to have that conversation with a group of left-leaning activists and change the country. I'm going to go and have that conversation with capital.
Or in a Twitter echo bubble.
Because that's where it's going to matter. I'm going to go and have those conversations in Stellenbosch, because that's where it's going to matter. I'm going to have those conversations in Houghton with the soccer moms, because that's where that conversation is going to matter. You see, we have to be thinking to ourselves, how do we have conversations about building solidarity with people? Because, and I've said this before on Twitter, and it didn't blow up like this one, but I've said there are people who are progressive in all parties. In every single party, There are people who are progressive. They happen to find themselves mixed up with people who have conservative values and conservative interests and all of that. Maybe for identity reasons, maybe because it's what's expected from them in their families or whatever, but because we haven't found a common agenda that's progressive anyway, right? And maybe that person who's in the FF+, who's genuinely progressive.
Okay, now you're stretching it.
Listen. I'm going to tell you two things about your podcast today. It was your podcast that made me believe that.
I know, right?
When Corne Mulder sat here.
That was one of the most fascinating conversations. Like,
I'm
what?
so confused.
How is this man speaking so much sense? There was a lot of
Why am
nonsense.
I listening to Corne Mulder and I'm not cringing?
You know, that. Just as an aside, that's what gets me about the critique of this podcast, that we only speak to one group.
Hey, bro.
Just because MK goes viral, we make a point of speaking to every possible perspective that will come and sit in that chair.
Sure.
And you will be amazed at what you hear when you hear all those different perspectives.
And so I'm convinced that there are people who want the kinds of rights, the kinds of inclusive economies, the kinds of things that I want as a black woman who wants black people in this country to thrive across the board.
Can I add a caveat to that?
Ethnicities.
Can I add a caveat? Because I agree with that. And I agree that across parties there are progressive people. But then, once we've decided what it is that we want and where it is that we're going, then we go there. And we don't nurse anyone else's feelings. And that's what I think the question of solidarity has lost. And that's why I think MK is resonating. Because MK is saying, we don't care anymore. You can hound us, shout at us, label us, whatever. We are going in a direction. That's the message. And ultimately, other progressive forces in South Africa need to get to the point where they're like, no neoliberal economic orthodoxy is going to stop us. No media whinging is going to stop us. No backlash is going to stop us. We are now doing this thing. With our coalition, we are not turning back. And that's the message that I don't think is there.
You're right about the courage, but you're also right about the coalition. And that's the part I think we're getting wrong, is we're not building coalitions. We are building fiefdoms. We are actively building silos. We're actively doing that. We're not building coalitions. We're not willing to convince each other to join a coalition.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of it. But I think there's a bigger problem. And even MK, I think, faces this problem right now. Is that I don't think that we are going to build anything until we're talking about the practicalities of that thing that we want.
Yeah, sure,
right?
Sure.
So I'm no longer just saying progressive politics. I'm calling for a practical progressive politics, which I think is a very different thing, because I think solidarity requires action.
Yeah, agreed.
That there's no solidarity until there's action.
Solidarity with what?
Yes. Yeah, solidarity is an action. It's a verb. It's a doing thing. I can't be in solidarity with. It's not a feeling. I always make this example about childcare. I'm like, care is a verb. You can't say I care for I am involved in childcare.
In solidarity.
Yes. No. You have to do childcare. Childcare is a doing, right? Solidarity is a doing.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've put down an agenda of doing in this country. Especially in both the social justice, civil society space and the political space, we have put an agenda of doing for people. So we have said, we will do. You just sit back there and we will do. And so you can't build solidarity with everybody else because they have nothing to do. They're just waiting for something to happen.
Yeah.
And so you don't build solidarity or political consciousness for that matter without an actionable step and without people taking action, right? So at the Rivonia Circle, we say politics is the power to act, not the power to power. And I think that if we're going to build true solidarity in South Africa, we are going to have an action plan that calls everyone to action. That doesn't say to people, we are here to save you. It says to everyone, you have a role to play. You have something you need to contribute, and here's an action step. And I'll end this by saying what I think an action plan might look like, right? So I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again for those who haven't heard it. One of my favorite countries in the world is Thailand, in terms of their ability to create economic prosperity on their own terms. They were not a colonized country. And so I went to Thailand and I was looking at the buildings and I was like, here's a whole metropole with high rises that just don't look like normal high-rises. And I realized their lack of coloniality means they even built high-rises in their own image. But when you go there, you realize there's food everywhere. And so somebody said to me, the reason why is because 20 years ago, the king of Thailand decided that no one was ever going to go hungry in Thailand, that was the developmental commitment around which they were going to build the country. And so they started something called the Kitchen of the World policy. And that meant that they went to every village and they got each village to commit to growing one crop or one agricultural product. So co-ops were developed and villages were developed around those industries. Then they were like, oh, we need a logistics industry. So the state actually subsidized logistics companies. Then they were looking at agro-processing in the cities. And so the state started doing that. So when we think of Thailand, we think of it as a tourist economy. It's actually a food economy. It's one of the biggest net exporters of certain staple foods around the world.
Interesting.
And that was all built on the developmental objective that no one will go hungry. You can have $1 or $100 and you will still eat a good meal. Then the restaurants industry, if you can see where I'm going to with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I'm like, what is our food?
And the funniest thing is South Africa is just so wealthy and has such an abundance of talent, brilliance, and resources. We could take our pick.
We could take our pick. I'll give you 3 that I think could be our pick. Health. And by health, I don't mean health care. I mean general health of people. Mental health, healthy, safe environments. If we just committed to a healthier society, we would start investing in the care economy. We would start investing in social workers. We'd start investing in getting all of these young people who are doing voluntary work in their communities and paying them for the care work they do for the elderly. And we might be able to solve unemployment in a decade, right? Yeah. Second one, housing. If we just decided, I'll even reduce it more, toilets. If we decided everybody needed a toilet that works, they would by virtue of that need a house.
Yeah.
And then you talk about housing, spatial planning, transportation, building human settlements where people don't have to travel an hour in order to be... Do you see what I'm getting to with that?
Absolutely.
The run-on effects of that?
Just someone somewhere coming up with a plan and sticking to it. Not this muddle, fiddle, fuddle. We'll do everything and nothing, and then hopefully international investors will come in and then everything will be
And
great.
it's because we're waiting for somebody else to give us a plan, by the way.
Can I ask you this?
Sorry, there's a last one.
Oh, you're right.
Hunger.
Well...
And that is self-explanatory.
How do you have unity when you have a nation
20
suffering
million people
food poverty?
every day? And those are 3 things that even the most capitalist can agree that their customers need in order for them to buy anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Surely we can come up with an agenda where everyone agrees there's a minimum base below which we as a country will not suffer anyone living. And then everybody contribute to that, and we can have ideological discussions after.
Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch, and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel, so why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. Can I get your views on the GNU? What's going on there, and how are you assessing it at this point before we close?
Meh. I mean, and I really don't say that callously, right? I say it because, number one, the ANC is on slow-mo right now. It's really tentative. So the leader of the GNU, even internally, is on this very slow journey where it may purge people today, it may not, where some people agree. So that already makes me extremely unanimated because the ANC has just not come out of the gates here as a leader saying, this is how we're going to do this thing. But even the GNU itself, I just keep waiting for the plan to come up. I keep waiting to be animated. Not about a plan, it's about everything. I just need 5 or 6 things that everybody can agree on, where there's going to be no disagreement.
Even one.
One, something. And then I also need a president who's going to say, given the political win that this is for the ANC, who's going to say, I'm going to put on my big boy panties, and I'm going to say, if you do not, Mr. land and land. I don't know if land and agriculture are together anymore or not.
No, now they've been
Mr.
split.
Land Minister, if you do not perform on the following targets within the next year, you will be replaced.
Publicly available for everyone to see.
Yes, because there are 10 parties here now. And there are 8 more outside of this that I have a picking of.
You're free from the party strictures.
We don't need you
more than you'll
guys.
ever be.
At least half of this cabinet are people you can fire. So start getting busy, creating this as a political opportunity to hold people accountable and to have a plan and actually make this thing work so that the country can see something is working.
Yeah.
Because it's the government we have. I'm never going to say, I want this thing to fail. I want it to work for everyone.
Absolutely.
And I think there's an opportunity to do it. I'm just not excited yet.
Like, I keep asking this and people keep telling me it's too soon. And I'm like, I don't know when is long enough. When are we getting the coalition agreement that binds these parties? Like, that tells us how they're working together. When are we getting the plan that says this government wants to do A, B, and C?
I don't know, bro. I
it's maybe 4 months.
genuinely think that, that parties are fending for themselves right now. They're trying to figure out how to make the GNU work for them. And I'm just asking them, somebody think about how it's going to work for us.
Yeah.
Somebody tell us what it's going to mean for understanding coalition politics and making it stronger. Tell me Germany, this got over everybody's head. Last week, the German coalition fell apart. A day after Trump's victory, because the right wing there went, oh, Trump won. Maybe we don't have to be in this arrangement led by the left. So they go out of the coalition. Mind you, cabinet is still constituted. The thing is still functioning. It took them over 6 months to create it. That's why the thing is still functioning. Because it's not on the whim. And the chancellor or the president, the chancellor has agreed that because the coalition has fallen apart, he has no mandate. And so he's going to voluntarily call for a fresh election. Now, legally, he could keep that thing going for as long as he wants to, but he knows it's going to be dysfunctional. So in the best interest of the country, not his party, he has decided to call for a fresh election. The GNU has this opportunity to build the infrastructure for what is going to be coalition politics into the future. At least that one. Something, guys. Give us something. Give us a whiff of something. Give us something that doesn't make us feel like this is just business as usual under another name.
Well, Tessa, that's all we have time for. I need to go and do childcare.
I'm really grateful this is over.
No, it's so refreshing to hear from you. And, we continue to say this on this platform. There are so many important voices in our country that we don't give their flowers, when they can see it. And you're doing such great work. You're speaking so bravely. I hope the social media noise is not distracting your attention.
Listen, I've got too much organizing to
Exactly,
do. I do not live on Twitter anymore. I live in communities where I organize.
And the reason you have a following is precisely because people invest some hope in the work that you do. So keep doing that. And we appreciate your voice and we appreciate you joining us on SMWX again.
Thank you.
Aye.